Chapter 3021 Web. There were numerous citadels scattered across the Stormsia, hidden in its eerie and unpredictable waters. Some had been ruled by the House of Night for decades, some were conquered recently, as a result of Mordred infiltrating the Great Clan in preparation for the Domain War. A year ago, one of them was ceded to the river people after they escaped the tomb of Ariel, so that they had a home in the new and unfamiliar world Ananke had brought them to. That citadel had been known as the Black Obelisk before. It was a gargantuan stone spire rising from the water and pointing at the sky as an accusing finger. In fact, it was a finger, a tip of one. If one dove deep into the turbulent waters and followed the obelisk into the depths of the Stormsia, they would eventually discover that it connected to an immense hand carved from black stone, with 4 more fingers protruding from it at an angle. The structure was overgrown by enormous barnacles, seaweed, and algae, with myriad nightmare creatures nesting in the underwater jungle, but its form was still recognizable. That hand seemed like it belonged to a human, but there was something eerie and unnervingly wrong about it. And if one dove even further, into the crushing darkness of extreme depths, they could trace the hand to the arm, eventually reaching the colossal head of the inconceivable statue. No one knew what its face looked like, though, because everyone who had dared to gaze upon it either died or went mad, eventually losing their lives to the agony of violent delirium. So, people did not dive that deep near the Black Obelisk, and none of them had ever dived deeper than the hidden face of the drowned statue. The citadel itself was not very populous, considering that there was not a lot of surface here for people to live on. It was located close to the shores of the Stormsia, though, in relatively safe waters. Safe meant stable in the Stormsia, having nothing to do with how many abominations inhabited the region. More importantly, it was the closest citadel to the estuary of the River of Tears, which made it an important way station for the ships traveling from the far reaches of the Stormsia or from the east. So, the population of the Black Obelisk had been small and largely transient. That was how it had been before, at least. Today, the Black Obelisk was unrecognizable. Standing at its highest point, Sunny glanced down with a sense of wonder. Below him, a city sprawled above the waves. Bright sunlight poured from the azure sky, illuminating its vibrant expanse. The Black Obelisk was not black anymore, having turned entirely silver from the myriad strings of essence silk wrapped around it. Powerful cables of silk stretched outward from the silver spire, supporting vast platforms that swayed lightly on the water. These island ships were built from manifested essence, as well, supporting ornate residences, verdant gardens, and lush fields. Arched bridges connected them to each other, and myriad gondolas were moving in the channels between them. The streets were full of people, and on the outer edges of the floating city, new islands were being built by crews of busy workers. Dozens of graceful ships with silvery sails were moored to the long piers, and awakened warriors patrolled the waters around the city on swift boats or aquatic echoes. And all of it, the gardens, the fields, the people, emanated the sense of overflowing health and vitality. That was because everything in the floating city bore the blessing of its ruler, Ananke of Weave, the Silk Weaver. That was the title the river people had given Ananke after emerging from the Arc Amulets and learning the story of how she carried them across eternity, to the vast skies of a new world. As for the name of the city itself, after hearing it for the first time, Sunny was relieved to learn that his wasn't the most unsophisticated naming sense in the world. Come to think of it, the river people were quite straightforward with giving things names, as well: Weave, Verge, Twilight, Arc. The new city they had built in the Stormsia was called Web. This was where most of the river people lived. There was also an enclave of them in the vast city at the estuary of the River of Tears that Moonvale ruled, as well as a dozen crews scattered across the Stormsia, helping people of the human domain expand the settlements surrounding other marine citadels. Now, a year after arriving in the Dream Realm, the river people were somewhat settled into their new lives. Still, there were myriad things that needed to be done, and it was going to take many years before they were truly accustomed to life outside the tomb of Ariel. It's a marvelous sight. Sunny was being sincere. Well, of course he was. He couldn't lie, after all. Web was quite tiny, compared to the behemoths of human settlements like NQSC, Bastion, or Ravenheart. However, seeing it thrive tugged on his heartstrings. There was something about seeing the river people build a city that made Sunny feel like there was hope for all of them. It was a soothing feeling. Standing next to him, Ananke smiled. It is, isn't it? She paused for a moment, then chuckled. Do you know, Lord Sunless? When we first began building this city, we almost built the houses of youth out of habit. It was only later that we realized that we would never need them again. People age differently in your world, after all. Sunny glanced at her, remained silent for a while, and then smiled darkly. This is not my world, Anank. He turned around to the radiant vista of the floating city and added in a neutral tone. This is not my world yet. She nodded politely. After a few moments of silence, Anank added, we still built a house of youth, though, as well as a house of parting. They serve a different purpose than in the tomb of Ariel, but, although the purpose is new, its essence is the same. Like all other things in this new, peculiar world. Chapter 3022 Outside Perspective. Sunny grimaced, glanced at the sun, and then took a step back to stand in the shadow. The Stormzia was usually covered in mist and quite somber. Why did it have to be so bright every time he crawled out of the shadows to take a proper look at the growing city? I see that the unfinished island ships survived the recent storm. That's good. Anank nodded. The river people know a lot about storms. And according to the people whom you call the House of Night, the storms here are much weaker than they are deeper into the sea, having exhausted all their fury. Sunny studied her for a moment, then said in a curious tone. You seem to be adapting well. It has been a year since you and your people escaped the tomb of Ariel, hasn't it? So, how is it? What do you think about the world beyond its walls? Anank hesitated for a bit. It is a wondrous place, Lord Sunless. She paused for a moment and then added with a smile. And incredibly bizarre. Things are easier for me, since I had a long time to grow accustomed to the stillness of the great river. But my people have only known it for a short while, so it is difficult for them to adapt to the dream realm. Anank glanced at Sunny. As for me personally, I am still a little stunned. He raised an eyebrow. By what? Anank lingered, choosing her words carefully. By the scale of the vast world outside the walls of Ariel's tomb, and by the scope of your people as well. She shook her head. I simply did not know that there could be that many people living in the world. Even at its peak, the population of the river people was merely a fraction of the inconceivable immensity of the war realm's population. All of my people can probably fit into one of those harrowing human hives in the place you call the siege capital. NQSC. Anank shivered. NQSC, what a peculiar name. Visiting it shocked me the most, no doubt. Honestly, I was a bit terrified. Sunny let out a chuckle. Terrified? What can terrify a supreme? She shifted uncomfortably. The solidity of it all. Nothing moves, nothing flows. There's no water anywhere, only solid ground. And an endless mass of metal looming over me. A suffocating number of people, too many of them to fathom, locked inside metal hives, hidden underground. Gods. For a moment, I thought that I was in hell. Sunny glanced at her incredulously. Hey, that was a respectable district close to the city center. You should have seen the place I grew up in, it's 10 times worse. Anank let out a nervous laugh. The way you experience time is also very strange, Lord Sunless. I couldn't quite wrap my head around how a civilization can just exist, despite everyone knowing that time is slowly devouring them, no matter what they do, and having no control over their lifespans. Bizarre, it's simply bizarre. Just thinking about it gave me a headache. Not to mention that there's simply nothing above us. Just a vast, boundless emptiness. That's a frightening thing to imagine. Sunny blinked a couple of times. Well, now you know how I felt in the tomb of Ariel. She smiled. And speaking of that, Anank reached into the folds of her nebulous mantle and produced a booklet printed on synthetic paper. On its cover, a few words were arranged into a neat title, Exploration Report on Everything, by Nobody. She glanced at it with a complicated expression. It felt really peculiar to read about the great river, and myself, despite having no memory of that version of me. Of Weave being destroyed by a mad titan, the Serpent King ruling a great city. Life is sure full of surprises, especially when you are involved, my lord. Anank chuckled. Oh, but there were great things, as well. I quite like the city you call Bastion, even if it is imposingly enormous. Then, the place called Ravenheart, that was the first time I saw snow. Snow is a lovely thing, Lord Sunless. And there is the Garden of Repose, as well, truly a wondrous vessel, one worthy of carrying a god. Over the past year, Anank had visited several places both in the dream realm and in the waking world. The latter repelled her with as much force as it did Sunny and Neffy's, but she still stayed for a few days, exploring the alloy jungle of NQSC and meeting various champions of the human domain. Her people, too, visited Earth with the help of the Saints of Night. They needed to establish tethers there, after all, to be able to travel between the worlds and rapidly relocate resources. It seemed that the river people did not have a good impression of the waking world, perceiving it in the same vein as its people would perceive a death zone. And who could blame them? Toxic air, overcrowded siege capitals, hordes of nightmare creatures wandering the desolate expanse of deadly wastelands. If Sunny had not been born on Earth, he would have seen it as some kind of hell, too. Anank fell silent, lingered for a while, and then sighed. But mostly, it's exactly the same. Sunny frowned slightly. Exactly the same, she nodded. There might not be a defilement in the dream realm, but there are seeds of nightmare. People still live in fear of the corrupted, fighting a losing battle against them in order to survive. The future is bleak and terrifying, but everyone has blinded themselves to the truth, because that is the only way to live on without drowning in despair. She sighed. That was how it was in the tomb of Ariel, as well, shortly before the end. Anank remained silent for a moment, and then smiled faintly. But, beneath all that despair, there is still hope. And people find the strength to live because that single ray of hope does not allow them to give up. She glanced at Sunny. My people did not give up, and because of that, they found salvation. I am sure that all of us will find salvation, as well, as long as we do not give up hope. Chapter 3023 A New Student. Not long after, Sunny and Anank were in a spacious chamber, seated at a table. A beam of brilliant sunlight fell through a tall window, illuminating its weathered surface. There were several items laid out on the table, glistening in the light: a silver bell, an ordinary-looking rock, a beautiful glass bottle, a needle emanating a faint golden glow, a folded mantle woven out of sublime black silk, and a small lantern carved out of stone. They were, of course, Sunny's memories. Are you ready? Anank nodded, inhaled deeply, and then summoned a memory of her own. A black wooden mask obscured her enchanting face, replacing it with a ferocious visage of a snarling demon. It was Weaver's mask, a lesser replica of it that priests and priestesses of the nightmare spell had worn once, thousands of years ago. Anank had inherited it from her mother, and now, Sunny had used his own skill as a sorcerer to modify its elegant weave. It had taken him a long while, and as a result, they were going to have their first lesson today. Sunny gestured to the silver bell. Can you see it? Anank peered at the small bell, deep darkness nestling in the eyes of her mask, but then, it seemed as if a faint glimmer of gold ignited in their depths. I do. Sunny smiled in satisfaction. The enchantment he had woven into Ananki's mask served a simple purpose and was inspired by the "where is my eye" enchantment of the real Weaver's mask. It did not allow her to gaze upon the great tapestry of fate, but it did allow her to see the intricate spell weave of memories. The purpose of the enchantment was simple, but the enchantment itself was anything but. There was a reason why it had taken Sunny close to a year to successfully implement it, after all. Granting people abilities similar to his own was not easy. In the past year, Sunny had spent countless hours trying to create an enchantment that would allow others to see spell weaves, but all his attempts ended in failure. Over, and over, and over again, months spent in researching and experimenting, with no result at all. In the end, he had to change his approach entirely in order to succeed, and in the process, elevate his own mastery of weaving further by accident. The minor breakthrough Sunny has made expanded on the principles he had already known, but never considered deeply. Funnily enough, it had nothing to do with creating a spell weave. Instead, it concerned the materials from which the memory was made. He knew, of course, that only materials of sublime quality could sustain the burden of powerful enchantments. One needed something like blessed steel to forge a transcendent blade, for example. Mundane alloy would simply crumble under the strain of potent sorcery. He also knew that materials had innate qualities that responded well to certain kinds of enchantments and were inefficient with the rest. One could make a lethally sharp wooden sword with a bit of effort, for example, but forging it out of metal would be far more effective. By exploring this relationship further, Sunny discovered that there were enchantments that required highly specific kinds of mediums to take hold, refusing to function with any other. And in the case of the enchantment that could grant someone the ability to see spell weave, there simply did not seem to exist a medium like that. That was what Sunny had thought, at least, before taking a look at Ananki's mask. After studying it for a while, he was surprised to discover that it was highly suitable to serve as a medium for the enchantment he had in mind, so suitable, in fact, that it almost seemed as if the mask had been created for that exact purpose. He even found sections of its spell weave that were designed to serve as a foundation for an additional enchantment, the potential shape of which was very close to his own design. It made sense, really. Sunny knew that there had been weavers among the priests of the nightmare spell, even if only a few. They had to have a means of perceiving spell weaves, so he theorized that those with talent for weaver's sorcery were granted special kinds of masks that allowed them to do just that. It was just that Ananke's mask was not one of those. It hadn't been, rather, until Sunny completed the enchantment. And so, Ananke gained the ability to perceive spell weaves. That was only one requirement for becoming a weaver, the second was the ability to touch and manipulate essence strings. Sunny suspected that those who practiced weaver's sorcery in the ancient past possessed tools that allowed them to do that, but Ananke didn't need any. Her aspect already allowed her to both create and manipulate essence silk, which could be turned into essence strings with just a little bit of practice. Therefore, Sunny was excited to know that there would be a second weaver in the world soon, if everything went well. He pointed to the silver bell. This is the first memory I received. And the first one I modified, as well. Its weave is relatively simple. He pointed to the shadow lantern next. Compare it to a divine memory. This one's weave is almost infinitely complex. Even I can't fathom it, let alone replicate it. So, one would think that starting to study sorcery with the silver bell as the example would be a smart decision. Sunny chuckled, but they would be wrong. Only a fool would start with the silver bell, like I did, unless they had no other choice. Because even if it is a weak and simple memory, it is still a memory created by the nightmare spell. And the nightmare spell is the greatest weaver in existence, there is infinite skill hidden in the deceptive simplicity of its designs. He shook his head and smiled, then pointed to the folded mantle. No, if one really wanted to understand weaving, they would start with this. Because, unlike the silver bell, this memory was created by a mortal. Chapter 3024 Weaving 101. Sunny leaned back and sighed. But let us not rush to studying spell weaves. First, we need to define the terms. What is a memory, for example? Well, the answer seems to be simple. He gestured to the items displayed on the table. A memory is a magical item created with the help of weaving. But that is not entirely correct, because while all memories are woven, not all woven items are memories. I once enchanted an entire mountain, for example, but that did not make it a memory. Ananke tilted her head a little. You've enchanted a mountain, Lord Sunless. He nodded. As with most of my incredible feats, it was done out of desperation. I had to fight a cursed nightmare creature, you see, as well as its pack of great abominations. So, I enchanted a mountain to absorb the impact of the cursed one's blows, and then blew it up. Ah, the detonation was quite spectacular. Sunny remembered his short tenure as an academy lecturer as he continued. But let's not get distracted. What is a memory? A memory is a woven artifact imbued with a number of specific rudimentary enchantments, one that allows it to be stored within the soul of its master in the form of essence, one that allows it to be reassembled from essence into matter, one that allows it to repair itself when dismissed, and a few more. A combination of these rudimentary enchantments constitutes a memory, and by memorizing their patterns, you will be able to create memories of your own. Sunny rubbed his neck. The first memory I created was a slave collar. I lost my head as a result, but hey, it worked. He paused for a moment and then added in a somber tone. These foundational enchantments. I call them rudimentary, but of course, they are anything but. Storing items within the soul is something that only Supremes can do, and yet, memories grant that ability to all awakened. Turning soul essence into matter, well, I don't have to explain how stunning that power is to you. Infinite self-repair is an astonishing quality, as well. In short, the fundamental enchantments that make memories what they are staggering, from the point of view of sorcery. Ananke nodded. Indeed, that was why the nightmare spell was so alluring to many in the era of the Doom War. Being able to wield memories was a great advantage to all people back then. Sunny was inclined to agree. Creating such powerful enchantments and making their spell weaves so simple that even an untrained awakened like me could replicate them, that is a level of skill in creating sorcery that even I can't imagine. Which leads me to believe that it was Weaver's own design. The nightmare spell merely inherited the principles Weaver had instilled into it. He sighed. The problem, of course, is that Weaver was obsessed with secrets and knowledge. They believed that knowledge was power, and therefore surrounded themselves with countless lies. That devious demon never shared what they knew, so naturally, they never bothered to make their personal sorcery accessible to everyone, unlike Hope, who bestowed writing and runic sorcery to all people. Sunny scratched the tip of his nose. The only weavers of the past eras were those who received the ability to perceive, manipulate, and create spell weaves from the demon of fate. We don't know how they received that power, so we'll have to invent our own ways. He looked at Anank and smiled. That mask of yours, coupled with your aspect, is already a good start. You possess all the tools to master weaving now, all that remains is to accumulate knowledge and skill. He pushed the folded mantle closer to her. So, let's start with this. First, you will need to develop a sense of where the distinct patterns of the spell weave are, and how they are connected to each other. The lesson continued. Anank was an amazing student, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. Well, it was no surprise. She was a demigod, after all, so concepts that took Sunny years to comprehend and master were like a light appetizer for her supreme mind. Additionally, Anank possessed an innate affinity to weaving due to her aspect. In fact, she was a born sorcerer. It was just that the inaccessible nature of weaving had prevented her from ever mastering its art. So, the lesson progressed swiftly. By the end of it, she was already capable of turning mundane items into memories. Sunny pushes a small object, a pebble of manifested shadows, toward her, placing a dormant soul shard nearby. Now, we will move to practice. You will have to recreate the basic pattern of the summoning enchantment, anchor it in this soul shard, and then fuse it into this pebble. But first, you will have to create essence strings. Try to manifest a string of essence silk, but stop just shy of turning it into solid matter. As Anank tentatively attempted to follow his instructions, Sunny could not help but imagine the future. He had no doubt that Anank would become a proficient sorcerer soon. He also believed that she would take pupils of her own one day, finding a way to share her newly granted ability to perceive spellweaves with them. So, would there be dozens of weavers walking the vast expanse of the dream realm one day? Perfecting each other's craft, competing, sharing ideas. It was a nice thing to imagine. Sunny liked the idea of not being the lone weaver in existence. Not only would it potentially lead to his own improvement as a sorcerer, but it would also boost the power of humanity, no doubt. He smiled. Ah, the future is bright. There was not a lot of the future left, considering that the world was ending, but the little time they still had was bound to be bright, just like the Stormsia was bright today, ready to fall back into the embrace of twilight. Enjoying the time he got to spend with Anank, Sunny allowed his mind to wander and focused on a different incarnation. That one was enjoying life, as well. Chapter 3025 True Peace. Back in Bastion, one of Sunny's incarnations was listening to the conversation between Cassie and the forgotten saint of Mictlan, Inti. There were two more avatars of Sunny in Bastion, though, one of them was with Nephis, while the other had just delivered Rain and her cohort to the Ivory Island. Their minds had to be cleansed of the remnant traces of the plague, if there were any, but they could not meet Cassie at the moment. All they could do was make themselves comfortable and wait. That did not mean that Sunny had to wait with them, though, so he quietly sneaked away and returned to the city below, eventually finding his way to the quiet street where the brilliant emporium once stood. The cozy brick cottage was gone, yet the land where it had once stood was still vacant, facing the glistening lake. The owner was officially dead, but Aiko had managed to purchase the deed to the land under a false identity, so it still belonged to Sunny. Since the empty lot was private and secluded, he liked to come here from time to rest his weary mind and relax. Now, too, Sunny sprawled on the grass, hidden from view by the slope of the shore in the shadows of tall trees. All of his other incarnations were busy conversing with people or performing important tasks, but this one had an opportunity to do something truly incredible. To do nothing. Enjoying the wonderful feeling of being absolutely useless, Sunny spent some time in solitude. The warm breeze, the murmur of water, the rustle of leaves, and the hum of the city in the distance washed over him like a gentle tide, making him feel at peace. 1/7 of him was at peace, at least, and that was already enough. Slowly, he cast his shadow sense outward, allowing his consciousness to dissolve in the endless movements of the city. He could feel countless people around him, all rushing to live their lives, men and women, mundane and awakened, old and young. Absorbed by the titanic kaleidoscope of their existence, Sunny felt his own self disappearing for a short while. And that was a sense of peace that no mundane feeling could compare to. This was true peace, the peace of non-existence. These days, that was more or less the only thing that made Sunny feel truly relaxed, removed from all his worries and duties. Being a demigod, he required a special kind of downtime. Ah, I wonder when I'll get some time to myself again. Probably only after the end of the world. Sprawled on the grass, Sunny smiled. He spent a long time enjoying the nothingness of it all. Eventually, however, a couple of the shadows he felt in the city reminded him that there were still things he had to do. With a sigh, Sunny rose from the grass, dusted himself off, and stepped into the shadows. He exited them in the private study of a manor that stood within the inner circle of the castle's walls. Sunlight poured through a tall window, and a woman was standing in front of it, her silhouette contoured by the light. Sensing his presence, she turned around and pierced him with a stern gaze. The woman was wearing jeans and a white t-shirt, her hair like a cascade of liquid gold. She studied him for a few moments and then acknowledged him with a court nod. Sunless. It was, of course, Sky Tide, the ruler of the Chained Island and the matriarch of the White Feather clan. Sunny stared at her with wide eyes for a moment, which prompted her to frown. He coughed. Sorry, it's just, I think it's my first time seeing you in casual clothes, St. Tyrus. I need time to adjust. Her frown deepened, and she scoffed. I'm pretty sure that you saw me half dead and wearing nothing but a hospital gown in Antarctica. So, there's no need for that reaction. Sunny cleared his throat. Well, yes, that's true as well. Tyrus was one of the few saints of the human domain who knew that Sunny was still alive. However, it was not because Sunny had revealed himself to her on purpose. A year ago, he had thought long and hard about whom to contact. Sky Tide and Roan were high up on the list, but in the end, he decided against approaching them. He liked the Saints of White Feather quite a bit, but there was simply no practical reason for them to know that the Lord of Shadows still walked the world. He could continue to like them from a distance, even if that would make him feel wistful from time to time. So, Sunny had kept the fact of his continuous existence a secret from Tyrus and Roan. It was just that Tyrus had other ideas. After her daughter disappeared into a nightmare gate with a cohort of awakened from outside the White Feather clan, Tyrus naturally wanted to know more about who these people were. A routine background check would not have revealed anything, since their public identities were forged quite thoroughly. Sky Tide turned out to be more thorough, though. She did something that no one else had been able to do yet. She uncovered the existence of the Shadow Clan. So, one day, Sunny had to hurry to a dark alley in NQSC, where one of his agents was being strangled as Sky Tide calmly asked him questions, holding him in the air with one hand. Needless to say, his reunion with St. Tyrus was not quite as sentimental as he had imagined. But very memorable nevertheless. The Shadow Clan had to rework its entirely covert procedure as a result. Tyrus studied Sunny for a while, her already stern gaze turning colder and colder by the moment. In the end, she asked, So, what is it this time? Did someone awaken a slumbering titan near the Chained Islands? A swarm of cursed beasts barreling toward Bastion as we speak. A resurgence of the plague threatening to destroy NQSC. Sunny blinked a couple of times. What would make you think? Actually, never mind. But I must say, I'm a little hurt. It's like you're insinuating that I only come to see you when something has gone horribly wrong. Tyrus gave him a dubious glance. Sunny shifted uncomfortably under her gaze and then smiled. Well, it hasn't this time. I bring good news instead. Congratulations, there is a new master in the White Feather clan. Telly is back from the nightmare, safe and sound. Her return will be announced officially after she meets Cassie. Tyrus stared at him for a few moments, then looked down and let out a quiet sigh. After that, she straightened and headed for the door. I'll go get Roan. Just before leaving the room, she paused for a moment, then pointed to a cabinet behind her desk. You get the glasses and the bottle. Sunny grinned. That sounded quite enticing. Chapter 3026 all over again. Sometime later, Sunny left the Bastion Manor of the White Feather clan in lifted spirits. It felt good to be the bearer of good news, for once. Perhaps I do only speak with Tyrus when something awful has happened. Sunny pondered his habits for a few moments. But then, he couldn't quite imagine just visiting Sky Tide casually. A social call, to Sky Tide. How would that even look like? Sunny remained motionless for a while, then shook his head and continued walking. Plus, it's awkward, because everyone else thinks I'm dead. Being both dead and a demigod limited Sunny's opportunities to socialize quite a bit. On the bright side, that only made him appreciate the few relationships he did have so much more. And speaking of those, the speech was going to start soon, so he had to hurry. Reaching a deep shadow cast onto the ground by the wall of the castle, Sunny stepped into it and emerged in the corridor of a tall building that stood in one of the lakeshore neighborhoods of Bastion. He knocked on it, waited for a bit, and knocked once more. A moment later, a familiar voice resounded from behind the door. "Come in." Sunny walked inside and smiled. "I was in Bastion, so I decided to pay a visit." There was an old man with disheveled hair and eyebrows that seemed to have a life of their own inside the room. He glanced at him and grinned. "Sunny, my boy." Then, he froze for a moment, covered his mouth, and whispered, "Oh, I'm sorry, Sunny, my boy." Closing the door behind him, Sunny chuckled. "Thank you for your understanding, Teacher Julius." Julius was one of the few people Sunny had revealed himself to after returning from the tomb of Ariel. Back then, the moment he walked through the door, the old man joyfully welcomed him in this exact manner. He did not seem shocked by the fact that one of his students had magically risen from the dead at all. In fact, Sunny had been a little disappointed back then. Looking at the old man, he hesitated for a moment and then asked, "You don't seem surprised to see me, teacher." Julius chuckled. "I might be old, but I am not feeble-minded yet." With that, he opened a drawer and pulled out a copy of the exploration report on everything. The old man patted its cover lovingly. "Sunny, do you know how people sometimes say that they would want nothing more than to forget a book they love, just to be able to read it for the first time all over again? Well, who could have known that it would actually happen to me?" He chuckled. "The first few weeks after my memory was wiped, and everyone else's, were quite hectic. But then, I discovered this paper and, by the dead gods, it was like I turned into a little kid again, having received the best gift of my life. Not only was the paper riveting, but I also couldn't help but recognize my own students' writing style. Each true explorer has their own approach, you know." Julius shook his head and pulled something else from the drawer. It was a familiar-looking letter. "And then I found this." "Ah, you almost made this old man cry, Sunny." He looked at the letter for a while, then put it down. "To think that when we met, you could barely write." Sunny frowned. "What are you talking about, teacher? I was perfectly literate, thank you very much. The fact that I wasn't fluent in a bunch of dead languages does not mean that I couldn't write." Julius waved a hand and turned back to the exploration report once more. "And now, the river people are actually back. Real natives of the dream realm, Sunny. Do you even understand? Well, of course you do. You had something to do with them emerging from the tomb of Ariel, I bet." He laughed. "As expected of my student." Sunny shook his head and sat down, pointing to the exploration report with a wry smile. "You don't even know the half of it, teacher. I did not remain idle after writing that, you know. In fact, I spent a bit of time in an actual pre-Dark Times society, reached the bottom of the Stormzia and raided, explored a mystical city built by the Demon of Repose, conversed with not one, but two supremes from the ancient past of the dream realm, found the original seed of nightmare, got robbed by a terror who had once stolen Weaver's eye." He paused for a moment. "Oh, and I also met the Wandering Archon. Granted, we didn't get a chance to speak." Sunny fell silent, remained silent for a while, and then grinned. "So, how many contribution points do you think we can get?" That was almost a year ago, and today, Teacher Julius was finishing the work on the annotated commentary and addendum to the exploration report of everything, in the free time he had left after fulfilling his duties as the architect of the new education system, tutoring little Ling, and being one of the people responsible for diplomatic relations with the river people. The old man liked to stay busy, it seemed. Sunny sat down and glanced around, trying to guess what Teacher Julius was working on now. "Are you not going to see the speech today?" Julius chuckled. "Of course I am going. It is a historic event, after all, quite possibly one of the last few historic events we have left. However, there are too many people in Bastion, and too few of them can get close enough to Lady Neffis to make the experience memorable. So, in a short while, I will depart for the waking world and listen to the speech on the screen of my communicator. That will be far more convenient." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "Surely, you could get a good spot if you wanted to, considering your status." Teacher Julius smiled. "These old bones are more comfortable on my sofa at the Awakened Academy. Let the young and the restless compete for a glimpse at the shining goddess of humanity. I'd rather surrender my spot to them." He paused for a moment and chuckled. "Plus, I have an audience with Lady Neffis in a week. So why would I compete at all?" Then, Teacher Julius gave Sunny a wry look and asked, "But did you really just happen to come by, Sunny? Or was there something you wanted?" Sunny sighed. "Oh, well, actually, I have something for you." When he produced a printed booklet and handed it to Julius, the old man's eyes lit up. You did it. There was a title on the booklet as well, reading, Observations on the Frozen Wasteland. In short, it's really cold, by Soul Reaper Jet. No one can survive there anyway, so why am I wasting my time on this? Teacher Julius glanced at the booklet, a wide smile appearing on his face. I knew that if there was anyone who could convince that murderous woman, it was you. Well done, my boy. Sunny shrugged. You are welcome. And yes, she did indeed discover where the Hollow Mountains end, which disproved the universal world wall theory posed by. The two of them dove into a lively discussion, losing track of time. So, before they knew it, Teacher Julius had to depart for the gateway. And Sunny had to focus his attention elsewhere.